Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Wee. I'm Communications Director at dentsu Singapore. A very warm welcome to dentsu's Championing Good and Growth in an Era of Participation. I'm very pleased to introduce you to our dentsu speakers for today. Firstly, we have Prakash Kamdar, who is CEO of dentsu Singapore, who has himself really built purpose at the core of our business in Singapore. Alongside him, I also have my wonderful colleague, Sunil Narayani, who is the President for Products, Commercials and Partnerships in dentsu APAC. Without further ado, I'd like to hand the time over to Prakash to talk us through good and growth. Over to you, Prakash.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks for the kind introductions. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join this session. I would like to express my sincere thanks to TikTok for the opportunity to share dentsu's point of view with such an esteemed community of marketeers and peers across Southeast Asia. Over the course of the next 25 minutes, Sunil and I will share with you why dentsu champions good and growth, how we work with partners like TikTok, and consumers to keep moving the needle on good and growth in this era of participation, why it needs to be a focal point, how we can work together. We hope that by the end of the 25 minutes, you will at least feel compelled, if not inspired, to join us on this journey of meaningful progress at a time when the world desperately needs us to. So let me first start by setting some context. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally arrived at a time where reckless, irresponsible growth is no longer viable and will no longer be tolerated by our planet nor its inhabitants. Purposeful and balanced growth is simply no longer merely optional. Since the start of the pandemic last year, we wake up to such headlines every other day, and we should not be surprised. The recent climate change report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, otherwise known as the IPCC, consisting of scientists from 195 countries across the world, including Singapore, could not be any clearer about the fast-looming catastrophe that will impact the world, including our own region, Southeast Asia, as the headline on the right shows. The recent dentsu Global 2030 Consumer Vision Research, which is called the Age of Inclusive Intelligence, that was based on in-depth interviews with a panel of 20 world-renowned futurists, academics, authors, and experts, as well as multiple proprietary surveys from more than 20 countries, has also clearly spelled out that a new model of sustainable or stakeholder capitalism must be the way forward for companies. One where any company not taking a position on people, planet, and prosperity is not going to succeed in the long run and will be ostracized by consumers, suppliers, and governments alike. Conversely, there is genuine hope and opportunity, though, if brands and businesses are brave enough to seize it. We know that consumers, and especially Gen Z, as well as the Alpha generation, many of whom are in our region, are willing to pay a meaningful premium for brands who are willing to genuinely invest in ESG and be proud to own it. At dentsu, we have committed to ourselves being champions for meaningful progress and to being beacons of sustainable value creation, to helping clients navigate through and thrive in a world of change through solutions that generate both good and growth. And this results in never befores at a time when the world needs us to more than ever before. In Singapore specifically, we are committing to making this virtuous cycle of good and growth real through our expertise and heritage in creativity and innovation, a space that we have a right to play in and therefore a responsibility to play in. We are committing to addressing existential and emerging challenges of businesses, brands, and society by deeply integrating the breadth and depth of our capabilities in data and analytics, insight and strategy, experience design, content creation, performance media at scale, and technology, and working closely with global partners like TikTok, who are committed to achieving growth through good as well. So what exactly are we doing with businesses and brands? Simply put, we are working on both ends of the spectrum. On one hand, helping incumbents who form the vast majority of our clients to transform and inject a healthy dose of good in their growth agendas. And on the other end of the spectrum, helping startups who are already born to be a force for good to scale and grow quickly through our services. We believe only by working at both ends of the spectrum can we achieve maximum impact in the quickest possible time. And to be clear, this is not about CSR. It's about good becoming a core part of a business strategy for all businesses in order to achieve growth. Simply put, it is not just good for our souls as humans to do good, but now good for the balance sheet of companies as well. We firmly believe that making this virtuous cycle real is not an option, and we will spend every ounce of our energy in getting this engine of good and growth functioning like a well-oiled machine. We know that we have no time to lose. I'm proud to share as well that we have already made significant strides towards working on both ends of the spectrum. Just one example is dentsu's recent appointment as Float Foods' brand go-to-market and digital strategy partner for its plant-based egg product line. For the uninitiated, Float Foods is actually a Singapore-grown food tech startup that is on a mission to innovate, develop, and enhance Singapore's plant-based food ecosystem with the aim of contributing to Singapore's food safety and creating a sustainable environment by reducing animal consumption, whilst at the same time enabling consumers to eat healthy, nutritious foods. Now, you may be asking by now or wondering, so what does dentsu's vision, purpose, and capabilities and what you're doing in Singapore have anything to do with the era of participation and with this TikTok session? It has everything to do with it. And I will now request Sunil to share why.
Thank you so much, Prakash. Firstly, glad to be here. I am sure that what Prakash has just mentioned gives you a good idea of how at Dentsu we are wanting to partner with brands to champion good and growth together. So let's dive further and understand what good and growth looks like in the era of participation. What are the trends that are shaping some of these real examples that we are seeing in the space, both from a consumer lens as well as a brand lens. So let's first start by defining what is participation. Participation is kind of the act of taking part in an event or an activity. And this might sound really simple, but it actually holds a lot of significance because it is kind of a complete shift of roles that one plays in the value exchange. Let's talk about communication or engagement, right? Which could be between two people, or it could be between a consumer and a brand. Now, if one of them doesn't participate, we are left in a passive state and can't have a dialogue. And hence, there's always a merit in striving to move from a passive state to an active state of participation. Moving on. So what's so interesting about this era of participation now that we've understood participation? I guess the biggest interesting fact today is that the scale and the depth at which is happening. And I think is only set to increase with time. And needless to say, I think the internet, digital social media platforms, they're all the driving force that is behind some of these significant shifts that we are seeing in the way consumers have evolved, and also brands are adapting their business models and even their marketing strategies in relation to the shift that they're seeing in the consumers, which essentially will enable a lot more participation for their own customers. So let's first talk about what are we seeing in the consumer space, right? So consumers are, essentially they're actively forming communities where they have shared beliefs, they have shared social values, and they're actually getting actively involved in driving these communities forward. Also, they're very guided by their own value belief system, and they're quite vocal about those values. They are caring about the good, and they are actually taking actions personally. And sometimes they could actually be a lot more active in raising certain things. And that's where we are seeing that maybe by 2030, we will have that consumer to the creator economy moving to a more like an activist kind of a state for the consumers. And that's the report that Dentsu has done, which we will touch upon in a brief time. So largely with all of these factors, what we are seeing happen in the way consumers are evolving is that there is the rise of these creators. And who are these creators, and how do you kind of define them? So of course, there are many definitions that are available. Some are done by the social media platforms and some are done by other publications and media. But essentially, in the most simplest form, from my end, I think a creator is somebody who creates original content, a genuine content that they certainly believe in, and they would love to build communities around it, and then kind of push it out into the media space for others to kind of join. So that's the fact that we're seeing, is that there's a lot of rise of creators, which in turn is giving rise to the creator economy. And I think there are a lot of headlines that you can see on the slide, which talk about the enormity of the creator economy. It is absolutely huge. And what we are seeing is that a lot of big tech companies, including TikTok, they have taken notice, and they are providing these new age consumers the tools to amplify their creativity and express the kind of creator in them for the world, for both good and growth. And at the same time, brands are recognizing the value of people-powered marketing, which again involves real people, not like the high-end celebrities. And they're looking to collaborate with these new age creators in order to kind of create genuine content, be more creatively aligned, and I mean, in a way, push out a more relatable and influential message than standard way of advertising. And I mean, essentially, the brands are really trying to build that authentic, relatable connection with the right set of creators, such that the message is better received by the end consumers. So, I mean, with these pieces that I've kind of mentioned, if I have to summarize, how is the era of participation changing the role of the consumer, with probably like 3 simple categories as examples. So the first things first is, there used to be a content consumer, but now there's a content creator, and they are interchangeable. There used to be a shopper and a buyer, but now that the same person is also a social seller, and it's again interchangeable. And finally, we speak a lot about games, and there were people who were playing a lot of games, but now these gamers are actually creating games itself. And again, it's kind of an interchangeable role. So what you can see is that a pure play consumer of different media facts is now turned into a creator across 3 mainline categories that we are kind of delving in. And more importantly to remember, while this shift is happening, they are sticking by, or they are driven by, the values and the beliefs that they truly care about. So it is still intact, and it's not that there is a shallow approach to it. They kind of believe in that. So that's pretty much the trend that we see from a consumer standpoint. Now, shifting gears and seeing how are the brands perceiving this, or what's happening in the brand side, right? So, I mean, as I mentioned before, the brands have recognized the power of people-based marketing. They also understand, to what Prakash mentioned, there's an important need for them to be purpose-led in their entire existence. And it shouldn't be a CSR campaign, which sometimes is I would say, a good to have exercise or a checkbox exercise done by some brands. But there needs to be more internalization, and there needs to be more purpose in their entire existence of a business. And brands are looking to discover ways in which they can, get customer participation across not just the marketing strategies, but the entire product and the customer life cycle. And I guess from a brand standpoint, participation would mean unleashing the power of consumers and converting them into their brand advocates to start with. But I guess the ultimate goal will be that these customers itself become the brand and kind of embody the brand in a ways. And there are certain examples that we'll touch upon today to make this point a bit more clearer. So talking about some of the large shifts or trends that we're seeing for businesses, I think the first things first, as I mentioned, brands are, they're building good into their business models. What they're also doing is they, and again, this is not like a CSR activity, but they're ensuring that the good is at the core of their entire operations. And in a way that they are able to drive meaningful progress, not just for their business, but also for the larger community, which is quite important to kind of, remember. And if we speak about some of the ways in which brands are pivoting or looking at their own business models, as well as how they're participating with the customers, it's something that Deloitte has put down very well. I mean, there are 4 stages in which brands can actually get deeper and a wider scale customer participation. It of course starts with understanding customer insights, which we all do. I guess the end goal of harvesting these customer insights is that you are able to get customer attention, you're able to reach those customers, and you are able to hopefully move those customers from an awareness stage to a, more like a purchase stage. That's the first part of the journey. It actually, if you embed the customer participation further, you get into customer engagement. And that's when we speak about the involvement of creators and influencers, where brands will then tie up with such communities to drive authentic messages. Going a step further, there is a lot of co-creation that happens where the customers are actually part of, let's say, a product cycle or a customer cycle, and their inputs are being seen as a final output of a product. Again, there'll be examples that we touch upon that. That's the third stage. And the final one is where the customer itself is a brand. And that's kind of the ultimate stage of being, where, there's enough and more participation such that the customers are carrying the brand as kind of a living body itself. So with this, let's move on to some of the examples to understand what each of these, mean. The first case that I want to share is from Dentsu, Australia. It was done for American Express, and I think it's a great example of how we were able to drive both, get customer engagement, but drive both good and growth. Again, this was done at the time of COVID, really hard times for small businesses. So the idea that was pushed out by American Express is that they would put offers if the customers would dine at small shops, small restaurants. And what this did was it encouraged the consumers to dine at these smaller eateries. And in turn, not just, it was really not about growth, but it was about survival for them. So they were not only able to survive, but there was a lot of good in this entire piece of, helping this community, which was kind of the most hard hit by the COVID flare. And I think in context of this campaign, the message that is on screen, I think, which is helping out never tasted so good, it seems very contextual from that standpoint. There's the other example as well that I'd like to share with you, which is for the iconic brand Lego. Now, I guess Lego learned a long back that they need to have, or they need to be willing to trust their customers. And what they have done is that they've tried to understand the social needs of their customers, which is a very important piece. From all the research, there were two key findings that came out. The first finding was their customers, they like to build together. And the second one was there's a bit of a pride in the creation. So what they did was they took that pride of creation to a next level, and they have something called as Lego Ideas, which is a dedicated website that they have launched, where actually, their fans could submit, designs. And if the community upvotes it to a 10,000, those ideas are then picked up by the product team and then could be actually put out in the market as a live product. Now, this is quite huge because the customer input is not just understood, but is put into practice, and it sees the light of the day as a real product from a company. The way they're trying to do good in this factor is that they're trying to encourage people to be innovative and not hold back their creative ideas. And that's the piece where it drives both good and growth for Lego. There's another modern day example. Many of you may have heard of Minecraft. There's a lot of chat around gaming and metaverse that's going on. In that context, so Minecraft is a popular video game, and this entire map or the block or on which the Minecraft maps are built is all created by the users. So it's interesting that the users join, they start the game, but very quickly they are then hanging out in the Minecraft environment, building communities and extending that to actually creating newer maps that others can play. So if you can imagine, this entire brand of Minecraft is run by the users because they are going on co-creating and building newer maps, which is kind of the sustainable way this business model is working. Moving on to another example. Again, this is from the Dentsu house. This was done with Kroger's. Now, Kroger's is a retail company. And again, upfront, it was a purpose-led campaign where the key thing was, how do you prevent food wastage? So generally what we see is that there are a lot of unrelated food items in our fridge or the kitchen. What we did was we created an AI bot on social media where customers could actually send the ingredients that are in their fridge or they're left in the kitchen, and it would pick only those set of ingredients and then suggest a recipe. What this did was that it included the wider audience to participate. And along with the bot, we saw other customers participating and suggesting recipes, which essentially meant that, of course, there was growth from the factor of the retail business. But more importantly, we were able to drive a purpose-led good campaign, which helped prevent food wastage. And finally, an example on TED, and this goes the full distance where I spoke about earlier, where the customer itself is a brand. So if you look at the history of TED, which was, TED was launched like a, founded as a invitation only conference. And this was back in the 1980s. But what they did was they kind of took a bold move and they pivoted somewhere around 2009, where they launched TEDx. And TEDx is a version where they have actually given the keys to run the entire show to the volunteers. And this is run by the volunteers. And now you see TEDx is happening in many countries or many cities where TED themselves could not actually do the full arrangement and organization. So again, they trusted the customers, but essentially it's the volunteer base that is really driving the entire TEDx community or the show today. And I think it's come a long way. Last it's had about 30,000 TEDx conferences over the last 10 years. And in fact, one of the pieces that were out there is what it just involved 20 members of the core team, which is quite huge. If you look at the logistics involved really to do that, and the entire brand is carried by the consumers today. So hopefully, I mean, this gives you a good idea of the way we've been working with brands. And finally, moving on, to the other example of the Black Friday sale again with IKEA, again, powers the growth and the good factor. Now, if you move on to the piece of where consumers are heading, which is into the 2030 Activision report from dentsu, what we're seeing is that the brands will need to reconceive their customers as activists in the long run. It's the creators today, but it will be the activists. And hence, they will have a lot more play in causes like climate change, data privacy, and definition of what identity means. And that's something that needs to be recognized by the brands. Bringing into context on how do you leverage TikTok to champion good and growth. I think first and foremost, TikTok is a massive platform. It's got a big following today in terms of users. You've got 1 billion active global users. What we are seeing is that the TikTok creators are creating original communities and they're creating content that moves people. They have the ability to be kind of the unofficial brand ambassador. And as long as the brand is sticking with the values of the creators, they are in it. And I think that could be a good way for brands to activate them. Some of the other examples which typically talk about good is that TikTok is a critical platform, again, where users push through social causes, talk about create kindness or others, where TikTok has actually improved the way social communities are talking about social causes. And there are also certain hashtags that are in play, which can be used by brands. So what we are doing with TikTok is dentsu is partnered with them. And we are trying to move into newer programs where we can help brands to not just think about growth, but also good together in the partnership that we're running with TikTok. With this, I think I've spoken a lot around how brands and consumers have changed in the era of participation. I'd like to request Prakash back on stage and give out the key call to action that we want you guys to take away today.
Thanks, Sunil. Dear marketeers and my fellow members of the agency fraternity, I hope we have managed to impress upon you why we have decided to speak about the subject of good and growth today, and why it is in our collective interest and our collective responsibility to pursue purposeful growth. I hope we have also helped to connect the dots between purposeful growth and marketing, and why businesses, brands, marketers need to treat customers as activists moving forward. Why and how we can leverage the rise of the creator economy, the era of participation, and platforms like TikTok that champion this era to achieve meaningful progress. If we fundamentally accept that purposeful growth is no longer optional and that consumers need to be treated as activists moving forward, there are two fundamental questions that all businesses need to be asking themselves. Do you have a purposeful, or rather a purpose-led business model that commits to the virtuous cycle of good and growth? And second, do you have an effective participation strategy that understands social needs and values? Sunil and I will end this segment by inviting you, actually pleading with you, to join dentsu on this journey. We have literally arrived at the most consequential crossroad in the modern day history of our planet and of humanity. One path leads us to certain catastrophe, while the other leads to our future generations, and dare I say, as soon as our next generation, inheriting an inhabitable planet. And if we listen to our conscience, if we muster much needed courage, and if we are willing to commit to using the power of our collective imagination to create never before solutions together. So thank you once again for spending your precious time and for listening. And I guess as a last call to action, what I would request is, share with us what are some of, help us understand your good and growth needs and your journey. There's a QR code there. Feel free to take that survey and, speak to us at our booth, or please feel free to reach out to Sunil or myself, or, if you'd like to discuss this subject further and how dentsu can help you in your journey to achieve meaningful progress.